Mike 0 India Alpha X-Ray, Mike 0 India Alpha X-Ray, Oscar Hotel 8 Sierra Tango November calling.
From America 3, Italy, Golf Papa. Ich hoffe, ich habe das Call korrekt. Delta Kilo 2, November Echo zurück. Schönen guten Morgen, besten Dank fürs Reinkommen. Der Name hier ist Detlef, Delta Echo Tango Lima Echo Foxtrot. Detlef der Name, das gute Haus, 20 Kilometer südwestlich von Nürnberg. Uniform America 3, Italy, Golf Papa, Delta Kilo 2, November Echo. Bitteschön.
You are listening to the Emergency Broadcast Systems. This station broadcasts emergency news and official information on the air for assigned area.
Hello guys, Oscar Hotel 8 Sierra Tango November here from Survival Tech Nord. I'm happy to say the Icom IC-705 is finally here. Now before we all start getting excited, I need to tell you, there's a learning curve for me with this radio. So as you all know, or most of you know anyway, I'm coming from a Yaesu background, and the philosophies of Yaesu and Icom regarding user interfaces are totally different. This is excellent news for Icom, but probably not so good news for Yaesu. So for this video, I'm not going to pretend that I'm some sort of Icom user interface expert. Instead, we're going to focus on the features and functionalities which are important to weak signal, off-grid, and the operators interested in using this radio for emergency communications or preparedness. So let's kick it off by talking about the most magnificent features of this radio. And incredibly, you won't find any mention of why these things are incredible in the user manual or the marketing material. What I'm talking about are the design goals of this radio. A radio which is designed to provide you all the equipment and tools you'll need to operate when you're out in the field. It's kind of like a toolbox or a Leatherman, a Swiss Army knife, or perhaps a Dremel with all the accessories you could ever imagine. Now I'm coming from the Yaesu FT817ND. That's been my primary QRP field radio. But deploying with the Yaesu FT817ND or 818 isn't actually straightforward. For example, if I want to run 10 watts, I need to do so with an external 10-watt amplifier. Or if I want to run data modes, I need to do so by adding an external audio interface and CAT control, neither of which are included with the radio. Now, another passion of mine is working other portable stations out in the field. This is often weak signal work, where the filters become incredibly important. The filters must be added on the Yaesu FT817 and 818. Now, I really wouldn't like to sound like I'm hating on my Yaesu FT817 or 818, but if I really want to make an effective package out of this radio, there's so many different things I need to add to it to bring it up to the level of other modern radios on the market, like the Icom IC-705. So not only do these accessories add to the price, they also add to the bulk of the radio when deploying in the field. Perhaps now you're beginning to understand my excitement for the capabilities of the Icom IC-705. In my opinion, the IC-705 has gone well beyond the expectations of the average off-grid radio operator. But let's take a look at it and see what it's all about. Now, whether you realize it or not, the Icom IC-705 comes with a plethora of features, and these aren't just bells and whistles. These are the type of tools and utilities every full-featured amateur radio for portable communications on the market today should be equipped with. And I mean, they could have stopped right there, but they went the extra mile and they said, look, people are using this radio, operators are using this radio out in the field, off-grid. What are the tools a modern off-grid radio operator requires when they're out in the field? Let's take a look at some of these features. Now, the thing that'll make or break a great radio is receiver performance. If you can't actually manipulate the receiver to hear what you want to hear, there's no point to the radio. With that said, the IC-705 has variable bandwidth filters built in. Now, there's a couple of different ways we can use these filters. We can use the presets and select them in real time from the touch screen on the 705. But we can also adjust the variable bandwidth filters or the bandwidth of the variable bandwidth filters in real time during a QSO and save them as our customized presets for the way we like to operate. The radio operator is given full control of the filters in this radio. The filters are already built in, and unlike my Yaesu FT817ND and the FT818, I don't need to pay extra for mechanical filters. So the variable bandwidth filters on the IC-705 are also augmented by a few different tools. We have noise reduction, we have a noise blanker, we have manual notch and auto notch. Of course, we had the attenuator and 2 levels of preamp, all of which the radio operator has complete control over. Now, being a newcomer to the Icom IC-705 and Icom in general, I believe the variable bandwidth filters are there to focus on the signal, to bring the signal up out of the noise. These other tools, the DSP, the noise blanker, the noise reduction, the auto notch, are there to attack anything which is trying to prevent you from hearing the signal you want to hear. Now, you'll be happy to know that these filters and the tools for reducing the noise all work equally as well on data modes, on voice, on CW, and of course with shortwave listening. Now, in regards to the receiver, there's so much more we could actually cover on this radio, but knowing that I want to focus on the off-grid aspects of this radio, I'm going to go ahead and share a playlist in the description with videos from other YouTubers who are also focusing on this rig. With that said, let's take a look at the things which makes this radio very interesting for off-grid, for preparedness, for emergency communications, and also for the data mode operator in the field. Data communications has become one of the keystones or pillars to amateur radio emergency communications and preparedness. And unfortunately, until recently, there's been an intrusive amount of cabling or additional boxes bolted to the outside of the radio to enable the data communications we want to achieve with our computers, tablets, Raspberry Pi, or other type of devices. The Icom IC-705 solves this by including many of the tools we need for data communications inside the enclosure. So we no longer need that signaling bolted to the outside of the radio. We no longer need that cat control cable or audio cables between your laptop, Raspberry Pi, tablet, and the radio. Everything you need for data communications is already built in, and you connect it with one USB cable. Now, I've already tested this on Windows, on Linux, on the Raspberry Pi, and on my Android tablet and smartphone with absolutely no problems. The Icom IC-705 will present itself to all of those different operating systems as an audio interface, just like your Signalink or your ZLP Mini Pro SC. Now, I've already been doing a lot of testing with Windows and the Raspberry Pi using WinLink and PAT WinLink. I have also tested with all of the different modes from slow to turbo from JS8 Call. And naturally, I've been testing out with FT8 because I think many of you will love this radio for portable FT8 without all of the wires and wire mess we would normally have to carry along with us. For the QRP data mode operator, I think the IC-705 is going to be a breath of fresh air. Now, many of you also had some concerns about the frequency stability of this radio, because you were interested in using this radio for very narrow bandwidth data modes while operating QRP. So one of the final tests I did was with WSJTX and Whisper. I ran Whisper for quite a while because I wanted to see the frequency stability of this radio from multiple stations, as many stations as possible actually. Now of course I don't have a reference station, but I hope that most of these stations aren't lying to me when they say there's not much drift coming from my radio. So there were a few different tests from different locations at different times of day with no attempt to protect the radio from temperature variations. So if you're interested in the frequency stability of this radio or the drift during Whisper testing, I've published those results on OH8STN.org. You'll find a link in the description. Now, one of the features the Icom IC-705 has built in is a audio interface. Now, this probably doesn't surprise you. What might surprise you is its compatibility with mobile devices. So naturally, I test the internal audio interface of the 705 with Windows 10, with Linux Ubuntu, but I also tested with the Raspberry Pi, an Android tablet, and an Android smartphone. Now, I think what's amazing about the 705's internal audio interface is its compatibility with mobile devices. I did a lot of testing with Pat WinLink in the 705 with my Android tablet, but the software for Pat WinLink was of course running on the Raspberry Pi. Now, of course, all I had to do to make this work with the Raspberry Pi was plug the 705 into one of the Raspberry Pi's USB ports. Now, naturally, when plugging into a Raspberry Pi, it acts as we expected it to. However, with a mobile device, an Android smartphone or tablet, when you plug it in using your OTG cable, the 705 also presents itself to that mobile device as if it's an external audio interface. So what we are looking at now is WeatherFax data being collected. I'm using the 705 with its micro USB port connected to the USB-C port on my Samsung Galaxy S8. I'm using an app called HF VHF or WeatherFax for Android from Wolfie. So naturally, we see this app connecting to the 705 through its USB interface. Now, we could also connect this app to the 705 using Bluetooth, but I think we're going to cover that in another video. Here we have another example. This time we're copying RTTY or radio facsimile from the German Weather Service. We're using a Samsung Galaxy S5e tablet. And again, the software is from Wolfie LLC and it's called Droid RTTY. The entire point here is to show you the compatibility of the 705's internal audio interface with a multitude of mobile devices. Now, if you're watching my channel, you're probably interested in the Raspberry Pi. So, of course, I did an extensive amount of testing with the Raspberry Pi and the Icom IC-705. So for this test, we connected the micro USB port to one of the USB ports on a Raspberry Pi 4 Bravo with 4 gigs of RAM. We set it up with Pat WinLink and did some exchanges with local gateways here in Finland, Sweden, and Norway. I found the setup with the Raspberry Pi and the IC-705 to be very reliable with RDOP on Pat WinLink. In fact, it was so reliable, the only thing I wished was I could have VARA HF on Raspberry Pi, but of course that's a Windows-only solution. Anyway, Raspberry Pi and the IC-705 totally reliable, and it all works A-OK. Now, earlier in the video, I told you how the IC-705 helps reduce the amount of gear we have to carry externally with the Yaesu FT818. Well, if you've done digital modes like FT8 or JS8 call or Whisper when you're away from home and out in the field away from your standard internet connection, you're accustomed to using a GPS. In fact, I believe I have a couple of videos using the Raspberry Pi and Windows with a GPS for that specific reason. Now, syncing up the computer's time for FT8 or Whisper or JS8 call aren't the only reasons we need a GPS. There are certainly times when we operate off-grid or for emergency communications or preparedness, where we might want to share our actual location over the radio. Well, the Icom IC-705 has an integrated GPS, and it's actually quite a good one. So what you're looking at now is that Raspberry Pi we used earlier for PAT WinLink. These are the GPS coordinates coming from the IC-705, which is connected with the same cable as the audio interface. That's the single USB cable. We get GPS data over that single USB cable, as well as the audio interface. Now, if that wasn't enough, remember we also get CAT control for the radio over that same single USB cable. So let's go back to the Raspberry Pi for a moment, and you can see here that my time and real-time clock in the Raspberry Pi are synced. Now they're synced using the IC-705. Now what's also amazing is we can take that same GPS NMEA output and use that in PAT WinLink or WinLink Express on Windows to output the position, to send a position report using WinLink over HF radio. Now once you've set up your Raspberry Pi to synchronize the system clock with the GPS, there's nothing left to do. PAT WinLink will be able to find the GPS using a tool called GPSD. You would have used or edited that earlier on to get the GPS and the system clock working. From that point on, all you have to do is open PAT WinLink, go to the Action menu, and click Position to send out a position report. Windows 10 is definitely more straightforward. I'm using a small utility, a free utility called GPSTime to synchronize the computer's clock with the 705. So using that same NMEA output from the Icom IC-705, GPSTime reads that and sets the system clock according to an interval you set up. The 705 makes it easy because it actually has two virtual COM ports. One, you get audio interface and CAT control and things like that. And the other one, you get the GPS data coming out. In this 20-minute time lapse, we can see GPSTime updating the system clock, which is totally overkill in the real world. But we're updating the system clock using the GPS data coming over that single USB wire from the Icom IC-705. So earlier I've said this radio is kind of like a toolbox or a Leatherman or a Swiss Army knife, so we can imagine the GPS isn't only useful for the things we just showed you. So here's one practical example of how I use the GPS on the 705. Today I went out and found myself a nice spot, I set up a fire, and I used the 705's GPS to actually log my GPS location. Now I can save that location on the 705 so that I can call it up again later on and find that spot once again. Or I can also share that GPS location or the location of my camp with some other radio operators with a compatible radio. Now another nice capability of the GPS in the 705 is the GPS logger. Now when you enable the GPS logger, the GPS in the 705 will log your positions as you go along. It basically logs your tracks. And it saves those tracks to the SD card. You can then go in with some application like Google Earth and extract your tracks or saved position logs from the 705 and open them in a mapping program like Google Earth. Now we can see where I was actually camping. It's not far from my home. It's just a little forest between my neighborhood and the big highway to the north. I think this is an incredibly powerful set of tools for emergency communications and preparedness. Now we've spent a lot of time in this channel talking about the wire mess and hopefully encouraging manufacturers to integrate options and features which help us better use their radios out in the field. Now one such feature integrated into the IC-705 is Bluetooth. Now, the Bluetooth is very cleverly implemented. You can use Bluetooth audio, mic, push-to-talk, but you can also use Bluetooth for cat control. For this example, I'm talking about Bluetooth audio using a Bluetooth headset. So I'm using a hybrid headset. It's both wired and Bluetooth, and the manufacturer is called Skull Candy, and the model is HF. It's a full-size over-ear headset, which is pretty lightweight for what it does. Now, the headset has extremely good dynamic range, although it favors the mids and low end. It's got excellent battery life, and you can wear it for hours upon hours without it becoming too tiring for your head. And most of all, though, with this over-ear design, it isolates you from all of the noise or distractions around you, allowing you to focus purely on the radio. So I've already paired the headset to the Icom IC-705, but now I'm going to turn them on. I've enabled the auto connect for Bluetooth headsets on the 705, so as soon as I turn on the headset, the audio will switch from the 705's internal speaker to the headset. So I'm using this headset purely for its audio capabilities, just for wireless listening to the 705. I still use the hand speaker mic as a microphone for the radio. I'm hoping I'll be able to find a headset with equally as nice audio, which is as comfortable on my head, but also has a good condenser microphone. If I can find a headset like that, it will allow me to operate voice modes with the 705 without actually taking my mitts or gloves off when operating in cold weather. We've talked a lot about the features and capabilities of this radio, but ultimately, we have to pay for those features and the radio's capabilities in terms of power and efficiency. A radio with all these capabilities will be utterly useless in the field if the battery isn't capable of powering it for very long. So it's important to look at the received current draw of this radio while the GPS is on or off, or while Bluetooth is on or off, just so we can understand how capable this radio is when we're actually operating off-grid. So the first measurement I did was the screen on, GPS off, Bluetooth off, preamps off, noise reduction off. The radio's current draw was 240 milliamps, or 220 milliamps when you have the screen in standby mode. Now when I turned the GPS on, the current draw was about 390 milliamps while acquiring satellites. That dropped down to 260 milliamps once the acquisition was complete. With the screen off while the GPS was on, it dropped down to 230 milliamps. Next, I tested the 705 with the GPS off, but I turned on the Bluetooth. Current draw with Bluetooth on was 250 milliamps. That was with the headset connected. With Bluetooth on, the headset connected, and the screen in standby mode, we had 220 milliamps. Next, we test with Bluetooth on and with GPS on and satellites already acquired. Current draw is 270 milliamps. But if we turn off the screen or put the screen in standby, it's 240 milliamps. Now finally, if we turn on noise reduction and the preamps, we're looking at 280 milliamps. Then we put the screen back in standby mode and we're looking at 250 milliamps. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm new to Icom and the Icom user interface, so I'm not sure if this is possible, but I'd really like to share the configuration for the 705, which I used to get these numbers. If that's possible, I'll share those numbers and configuration on my website. It's no secret how hard I've been on Yaesu about the power and charging for the Yaesu FT818. I've been equally as hard on Elecraft for their lack of good power and charging for the KX2 and KX3. Now, fortunately, with the IC-705, it seems like some good engineers have been paying attention because they've given us some pretty incredible power and charging possibilities. So we've already talked about the current drain with the internal capabilities on the radio, but there's also a very interesting battery pack, and Icom has chose to use a battery pack from its HT series. So if you're already invested in an Icom HT, I believe this battery pack would be a good choice if you've chosen also the 705. Now, Icom has also given us the ability to charge up that internal battery pack from either USB or with an external 12-volt supply. They've also engineered the charging circuit for the 705 in a way that allows us to top up the internal battery pack in 2 or 3 hours. So we can actually charge the radio while we're operating the radio, and this is something that's simply brilliant. I'll also take this opportunity to pick on Elecraft and Yaesu a little bit and ask them to please learn from the Icom 705's charging and power implementation. So on the starboard side of the 705, you'll find the 12-volt USB input as well as the micro USB connector. And again, we can charge the 705's internal battery or power the radio through either of those ports. So for those of you who've been with me a while, no slow charging, 8 hours, 10 hours, 15 hours, which is totally ridiculous. We can charge up the radio while we're using it. We can charge from USB. We can power from an external power supply, or we can charge and operate from the external power supply. This is absolutely brilliant. So from the off-grid perspective, what else can I tell you about the IC-705? Well, it's a toolbox. I've already said that. But it's a magnificent toolbox, and there's almost everything you would need to operate while off-grid, short of the antenna tuner, if that's important to you. I mean, if you have to fault this radio for anything, that would be it, but I think that would be silly. We can use a resonant antenna with such low power radios to make the most out of the output power that we have, and that's the approach I'm taking. Now, I've also shown you what it cost me to update the Yaesu FT817ND or the Yaesu FT818 to the same level, or not even the same capability, but to maximize its capabilities as much as possible. And that was approaching $1,200. When you add up all those things, you still end up with a radio that has a bunch of different boxes and cables attached all around the outside of it. Now really, we already understand from working in the field, from experience, that connecting up all those wires and cables and things like that, it's just a mess. So the IC-705, being an all-inclusive rig, it's certainly not a bad portable radio strategy at all. So my final thoughts, well, this is an excellent off-grid radio. It's off-grid capable, and the engineers have thought hard and long about how we actually use our radios out in the field. Now, I've already seen there's the BP307 battery pack for it. That's about 3,000 milliamp hours. I'm going to get myself one of those. And I've also heard about the OH8STN antenna tuner from Icom. I'm going to try to get one of those for the channel so we can actually review it out in the field. I'm not happy with the current options on the market in regards to antenna tuners for the 705. The Icom AH4 is actually iconic, so I'm hoping Icom's going to do a pretty amazing job with this AH705. Now I'm listening, and I've heard you. I'm going to do a review on that antenna tuner because you all have asked me to. But I'd like to start with what I think will be the best one, and then we'll take it from there. So let's go ahead and close down this video. We've spent a month working on this video and learning to understand the Icom IC-705, and I'm glad I invested that time in this video. The next step is to do some practical videos on projects, kits, the Raspberry Pi, laptops, data modes, battery packs and solar power, all of the practical things we normally do on this channel, we'll start pushing those videos out for the Icom IC-705. Also, don't forget to check that playlist I've shared in the description. There's lots of IC-705 videos from other YouTubers, and I think you'll find that quite interesting. So, thanks for being patient, thanks for supporting the channel, and I couldn't do it without all of you. Rock and roll, guys. Thanks for watching. Ciao.